All right, let's try this again. First of all, thank you all for your patience over the last few weeks and the constant changes in this class, delays, pushing off, canceling last minute. Baruch Hashem, almost every time had to do with the simcha. Sometimes it was last minute, sometimes planned. Actually, just coming back from a breath right now. But I have to tell you a story. I sat down in my normal seat, just over here, and I feel something under my shoe. And I pick up my foot, and I see this long string of gum. I guess when I was walking back from the breach, I stepped in gum. I sat. We have a little rug under the table, and it's like all in the rug. It's stuck to my so. They can only get better from here. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. And you did want to know about my tsaris like that, so I'm sharing it with you. Baruch Hashem. Okay. L'inyanenu. Let me get my stuff ready here on the computer screen. I have everything ready. And here. Tov. Our plan tonight is we're going to, and I've mentioned this a couple times along the way, we're going to talk about one more personality, Rav Shimshon Hirsch, in a moment. And then, because we've spent the last 3 months at least going through personalities, starting from the Baal Shem Tov and also the Vilna Gaon and all the different groupings of the Hasidim and the non-Hasidic world, Litvish world, etc., and the Soloveitchiks and all these other personalities. Now that we'll conclude with Rav Hirsch tonight, Bezrat Hashem, then starting with next week or whenever the next class is going to be, hopefully next week, we will then backtrack a little bit into the actual history that was going on around some of these individuals. Some of it we did when we talked about the growth of the world of yeshivot. We talked about some of it when it came to the machloket, or the dispute between Rav Emden. It was just a tumultuous time. And as we enter the early part and then into the latter part of the 19th century, early 1800s to late 1800s, as we will now, it gets even more tumultuous. We're still before the First World War and the Second World War, and the Holocaust are way before that. But it's getting tumultuous in the world of Judaism. It started all the way back when we talked back in the months ago. We talked about Shabtai Tzvi, the false Messiah, Yaakov Frank, the false Messiah, the Lahavdil, the beginning of the Hasidic movement with the Baal Shem Tov. All these in the 1700s, all these are like massive changes. It's not static. I imagine 100 years from now, people look back at this part, mid 20th century to early 21st century, for some changes also within the Orthodox Jewish world and some of the challenges that we are facing within our own people and from without. But that's not the topic for tonight. Let's talk about Rav Hirsch. First, let me just show you. Probably, I imagine, it's one of the more famous pictures about whom we are speaking tonight. This is Rav Hirsch. I want to get one thing out of the way, and that is his name. Many years ago, I had a friend when I was still single. I had a friend who was of Yekish descent, Germanic descent, and I referred to Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, and he stopped me and he said, "It's Shamshon Raphael Hirsch." And that stuck in my head forever, literally for 50 years. As I'm going through this, I'm understanding from various family members that there's a dispute about how his name is actually pronounced, if it's Shimshon, Shamshon. So I'm going to refer to him as Shimshon. He's also known as the Rashar, Resh, Shin, Resh, Rashi Tevot, or initial letters of Rabbi Shimshon Raphael. But he's known as the Rashar. If you look at a lot of, especially things that have been printed in the last 30, 40 years at least, if not more, and you see names that are quoted of various Gedolim of our history, you'll see his name as abbreviated as the Rashar. Okay, so that's who he was. That's his picture. So let's talk a little bit about who he was, why he was so significant, and then I kept mentioning in the my messages that we're going to have a special guest speaker tonight. So Bezrat Hashem, before the end of the class today, we will have two direct descendants with us to speak a little bit about whatever they want to speak about. So let's talk about him first. He's born in 1808. He lives for 80 years. till 1888. So we're not talking about, the time of the Gaonim and all this. Is also something that I think is important. I said when we first started this whole class, long, long time ago, that I'm not so interested in the dates, but it's important to understand because at least a general timeline, because people say, oh, the Rambam was a couple hundred years ago. No, it was over 800 years ago. The Rambam, why didn't Rashi quote the Rambam? Well, the Rashi died before the Rambam was alive. So to know that Rav Hirsch was literally just 150 years ago or so, my math is not so good, so it's probably less than that or different. In any case, he was probably one of the most formidable, I don't say formidable, and even though it may be acceptable, I never will say that, formidable Torah scholars, Jewish individuals of the 19th century, especially when it comes to many topics, especially when it comes to philosophical approach and his proactivity for Orthodox Judaism. When I say Orthodox Judaism right now, I'm thinking that as a very general approach to people who follow halacha. Okay, I'm not going to just dissect it into the Haredi world, the non-Haredi Litvish, and the Chassid. It makes no difference because of what we're going to talk about is the halachic-based world where he is from, where he goes against the non-halachic. Well, we'll get to that in a little bit. His fidelity to Torah, his engagement at the same time with the quote real world, the outside the Torah world itself, helped shape a lot of who he became, helped shape a lot of his philosophy, the books he wrote, the halacha, the parshanut, the explanation of Torah that's come down to us. He wasn't just, quote, a rabbinic leader. We have come across many that their claim to fame was they were great rabbis and they influenced communities, or they were Hasidic masters. And he was not just a leader of a community. He was, there's a word, a polemicist. Polemics is when you engage in a controversial debate, much like is going on now in many topics in Israel right now. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, just try and drive around today. He was a builder of communities. He was a prolific author. We will talk about a couple of things that he wrote. But probably the hallmark of who he was a passionate defender of the Torah, and in an era, which we'll see, of tremendous challenge when it came to that, where, of course, I'm alluding to the fact this is the early birth of what becomes known as the Reform movement, not reformed, it's called the Reform movement, and how he goes up against them. But let's go back to his early days. June of 1808, he's born in Hamburg, Germany. He's raised in a home that is filled with Torah observance, but not isolated from the secular world. We have seen many personalities over the last few months that they grew up in a heavy Torah environment. That's what they were, that's what their focus was, just the Torah, and the outside, what was going on around them, was not necessarily part of their day-to-day education. His father, Raphael Aryeh Hirsch, was a successful merchant, and he studied in Frankfurt and had a direct scholarly legacy to the Chatan Sofer, also known as the Chassan Sofer. His mother came also from a rabbinic background, who was able to trace her background to Rashi. As a boy, now some of the people we've talked about in the last few months, we said that they were geniuses one after another, and they were already at the very young age. They were spouting Gemara by heart, the whole Shas. Rav Hirsch, went through a traditional cheder education. He was exposed not only to Torah, but also, I say, to culture, broader intellectual things as well. And one of the main influences in his life was a man named Rav Yitzchak Bernay. He was the chief rabbi of Hamburg. And what was unique about Rav Bernay's approach and became imprinted onto Rav Hirsch was this idea to combine rigorous Torah learning with a university education. And when we talked about Rav Soloveitchik, the most recent, Rav Yosef Dov Levi Soloveitchik, this is one of the things that one of his legacies, Rav Hirsch's legacies, this filters down into this part of the family, then into Yeshiva University, which we'll see. But when Rav Hirsch was young, and he had this mentor, Rav Bernay, who was so influential in his life, and he understood and believed that the Torah, along with university education was so critical that already made an imprint onto Rav Hirsch. He saw it as a model of someone who was Orthodox, who was still able to navigate in the modern world, in quotes, without compromise. Who was Rav Bernay? Who was he? So he was in the late 18th, early 19th century, a German Rav, and he was involved in some move to modernize Orthodox Judaism, not away from halacha, but to bring it into certain. And I don't want to get into him tonight because he's not our topic. But he was an out of the box thinker. He was the chief rabbi of Hamburg until he passed away in 1849. What he was known for was blending Jewish scholarship with elements of enlightenment of secular education. He studied at yeshivot. He also studied in Würzburg. He studied in Prague. He learned classical and modern philosophy, philology, study of words, literature. Now, if in the back of your head you're saying, I know certain Roshei Yeshivot like that, maybe you thought of Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal, maybe you thought of Rav, if you're from Ma'ale Adumim, maybe you thought, and beyond, thought of Rav Rabinovich Zatzal, maybe you thought of Rav Soloveitchik. Where this didn't happen in a vacuum. These people you may be thinking about, that didn't happen in a vacuum. One day they woke up and say, wow, you know what? Maybe we should combine the educations. And there's a reason, by the way. It's not two separate tracks. We're going to see about that. It's a combination. But what he does do, Rav Bernay, introduces some reforms into Jewish education. He believed that the speaking in shul, this is a very touchy subject. When we go back to the history part of this time, we're going to talk about this specifically, the language in which the people would hear the rabbi speak. He was more in favor of German rather than Yiddish, or Hebrew instead of Yiddish. He also instituted some other reforms that were in order to protect early insinuation of the Reform movement into the Orthodox world, in order to strengthen the Orthodox world. And I'm kind of leaving it nebulous exactly what he did, because we're going to see more from Rav Hirsch himself. But his legacy, Rav Bernay's legacy, is that he laid the spiritual groundwork for people like, and especially like Rav Hirsch, for the development of modern Orthodox. I'm not talking about modern Orthodox, what we see today in the United States per se, but already then, modern Orthodoxy in 19th century Germany. He felt, and he passed this on to Rav Hirsch, that not only did a person have to really be absorbed in what's known as lomdus, like really insightful learning in Torah, not just something surface, but also had to know German properly, the language, have a classical education. Rav Hirsch went and studied in the University of Bonn. He studied classics, but he maintained his fealty to halacha throughout. It's really important to stress this, because I'm going to put a parentheses here. We talk about history repeating itself. Matter of fact, I've referred to Rabbi Wein, Zichrono Livracha, to his book that I have about patterns in Jewish history of various things. And it's true, the history does repeat itself, especially when we get to Holocaust. We'll see that some of the things we talked about in the 17th century, in the 14th century, in the 10th century, all repeat themselves in the Holocaust. But we tend to think of it in the bad way. Oh, this is what they did to the Jews in the Spanish Inquisition, and this is what they did to the Jews on October 7th. We tend to think it, but it's also true when it happens to do with philosophical approaches and how people pass down tradition. So that the idea of being able to be a successful business person, or even earlier in life, going to university, learning in Chutz La'aretz, I'm talking about right now, and being able to go to some student school like that, assuming you don't get beat up on the way to school and have a swastika painted on your car, and at the same time remain a religious, observant Jew and still absorb other things. But Again, they're not to be seen as separate tracks. We'll see shortly, because his approach, Rav Bernay, and also, of course, Rav Hirsch, is that these philosophy classes and the philology classes and the history class, all that he absorbed was never ever meant to supplant or replace Torah, but rather to work in tandem. If I mentioned before, I mentioned Rav Rabinovich, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha. He, who I knew, many of us on here tonight knew Rav Rabinovich. To say he was brilliant is an understatement. But if you just, all you need to do is to open up a couple of his svarim, and you see, or articles he wrote, and you see mechanical drawings of electrical drawings, and his breadth and depth of knowledge of how things worked in this world, along with his unbelievable Torah scholarship, but that again went hand in hand. What would be the reason to learn? I don't know what his degree per se was. I'm making it up, that he had a doctorate in electrical engineering. It wasn't just to have the knowledge of electrical engineering. It was because when someone asked a Shaila about when you're going to walk by a sensor in a hotel, the doors are going to open for you, what's happening there? What if I want to open my door with a key card on Shabbat? Well, is that a problem? And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other types of questions. That was the purpose for Rav Rabinovich, Rav Soloveitchik, and others, to learn these kinds of things, to apply them into the halachic world. They didn't come up with this idea themselves. This is already rooted back to the 19th century and before, but especially from Rav Bernay, and then how, when he laid the foundation, and Rav Hirsch ran with it. At age 22, now, remember, he lived 80 years, and when you talk about the age of 22, in the 1800s, it's already someone who's maturing, who's older. 80 years old is already a nice age at that time period of history. You talk about, now think about today, someone who's 22 years old. I know I got married at 22. I was a kid. But the amount that so many of these Gedolei Yisrael that we've talked about, that they accomplished at a young age. I talked about the fact that the Rambam wrote his commentary on Mishnah before, I believe, he was 18. So Rav Hirsch was appointed chief rabbi of Oldenburg, and then Aurich, and then Azenbruch. I just want to show you for 1 second, just so you just have an idea of where we're talking about. Okay, make this, whoops. There, I have them circled. I'll make it a little bigger. Okay. Azenbruch, Oldenburg, and up here, this is the third place he was. This is the general area of Germany where he was rabbiing. So the reason I want to show you this is you can understand he was in northern Germany. Here's Poland over here, the Netherlands over here. They really need to get their act together. So does Germany, so does Poland. So this is where he was. He was at such a young age to have been appointed chief rabbi and to move along and to grow with his communities. But they were not giant communities. It's interesting, when I was in Krakow in Poland many years ago, we were in, remember the Ramah, who we learned about, but Moshe Isserlich, who was the co-author, so to speak. He was the Ashkenazi author of the part of the Shulchan Aruch. He was the chief rabbi of Krakow, Poland. And in my mind, like most people, I thought, wow, there wasn't thousands and thousands and thousands of people in Krakow at the time with the Ramah. And we davened mincha at his shul, the Ramah shul. I'm sure some of you have been there. And our guide was telling us there were a few thousand Jews there. It was a small community. Probably more people, definitely more people in Ma'ale Adumim by 4 or 5 times than were in Krakow the time the Ramah lived there. So when he was the chief rabbi of these cities, they were relatively modest in size, but they placed where he was put into a situation where there was the brewing, because it was these communities in that part of Germany, the nascent movement of Reform Judaism. What is Reform Judaism? I don't want to get into too much. When we come back to the history part, I will, but it's the changing a lot of stuff. First of all, the belief that Torah is not Minas Shemayim, didn't come from God, it's man-made. Jews, as far as even nowadays, a Jew can intermarry to a non-Jew. One day holiday is different. Rosh Hashanah, other stuff. There's lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff that it changed. It didn't change like that overnight. It wasn't just overnight. Someone woke up and like all of a sudden things they wanted to change. What Rav Hirsch was very concerned with was erosion of German Jewry. Now, he understood history. He understood that when you have a charismatic individual, who are the individuals behind this, we will eventually talk about, but not tonight. But when you have charismatic individuals, like we saw people like the Shabtai Tzvi and Yaakov Frank, and I don't like putting in the same sentence, the Havdil, the Baal Shem Tov, and the Vilna Gaon, and all these people who can have an influence. He was afraid, rightfully so, that the reform movement would have enough passion behind it, it would cause an erosion in the Orthodox Jewish community. So he did something very interesting. He wrote a book, relatively small. It was called 19 Letters on Judaism, and he published it in 1836. And what it was a book that took the form of a fictional correspondence between a skeptical modern Jew, and someone who was trying to defend Orthodox Judaism. Now, interestingly enough, he wrote the book under a pseudonym. He wrote the book under a pseudonym. It was called 19 Letters on Judaism. He wrote under the pseudonym instead of his own name. He called it himself. His pen name was Ben Uziel, son of Uziel. The question is like, why did he choose that name? So I have it here. Let me find it real quick. I don't remember where I put it. Oops, maybe that was it. Oh, I do. Okay, let me come back here. I wasn't sure if I made a slide out of it to share with you. I did. How did, if you're going to come up with a pseudonym, or sorry, a pen name, a name you write a book under a different name, the question, of course, is like, why did you come up with that name? Let me find here. Okay. Oh, yes. There's a Gemara in Brachot, Megillah. I think it was Megillah Gimel Amud Aleph. It says as follows. There was a whole bunch of things going on in the Gemara before this, and it says in the Gemara, Amad Yonatan ben Uziel. Now, who was Yonatan ben Uziel? He wrote a commentary. Most of us are familiar with Onkelos, who was a ger, who was a convert, who wrote an Aramaic translation to the Torah, but it's more than a translation. It also involved explanations. Yonatan ben Uziel did the same thing, but at a broader scale as far as the amount of words. So in the Beit Midrash, Amad Yonatan ben Uziel Araglav ve'amar. Yonatan ben Uziel stood up on his feet and he said, Ani hu shegiliti starecha livnei adam. I am the one who revealed the secrets to man, which he implies the idea of within his commentary. On Torah, he wove in many sodot, or many secrets of the Torah. Galui v'yadua lefanecha. It is well known to you. Shelo lichvodi asiti. I didn't do this for my own honor. Lo lichvod beit Abba, nor to honor my father. Elichvodcha asiti. So he's talking to Hashem. I did this for your honor. Why? Shelo yirbu machlokot b'Yisrael. So there should not be division among Israel. Now, putting aside the bottom half, it basically is saying the reason he did this commentary was nothing to do with his own self-aggrandizement. Look how smart I am. Look what I'm able to do. But rather for Torah, for protecting Torah, for preventing machloket. So in his introduction to the 19 letters, Rav Hirsch mentions this Gemara as an aside. And he is implying, according to what I've read, he called his name for this writing of this book, Ben Uziel, to say that what he's doing now, he's defending Judaism. He wants it not to be about him. Wow, what a great author, what a great thing you wrote, but about the message. And the message was that we have to defend Orthodox Judaism. But it was, like I say, it took on a feel of a correspondence between a questioning individual. And so I don't know how many months ago, I was dealing with a young lady who had religious, but she had lots of not plain old, how do we know God exists, which is a common question, but lots of deep questions. And we were going back and forth, and I was writing long answers. I said, I should just say this and publish it under a book called 19 Letters. Like I said, I'll call it 19 Emails. Been there, done that, but not me. So this book was not just to refute reform movement, not just as a polemic against that, but it was a vision of what Orthodox Judaism holistically rooted in a worldview, not just blinders. We follow halakha. It says in the Shulchan Aruch, this is what we do, but a much broader. If you don't have it, it's something you should have. The other main book he had written, he wrote many, but like a standalone, was called Chorev. It was a book of philosophy of Jewish law, observance. I actually got it from my bar mitzvah. Still have it. And it was halachic and hashkafic, or philosophical approach to Judaism. Both books were groundbreaking. There were not books like that before. There were philosophical books. We know that. We've spoken about that. But this type, where it talks about halacha and discusses the way he does, was a first. Both these books became foundational texts in what becomes to be known as the modern Orthodox world. He reaches the highlight of his career in 1851 when he becomes the rabbi of the Israelitish, I'm not going to try. It's the IRG, which is in Frankfurt am Main. This community seceded from the main Jewish communal body. There was something called Austritt. Austritt was secession. And what happened was that Hirsch was worried. He was worried that if they interacted, forget about publishing books and forget about trying to speak about it. He was worried if there was an intermingling within communal organizations of the religious and the reform movement that could also have a hashpa'ah, or some form of an influence very negatively. And there was this secession. When he took this position in Frankfurt am Main, the shul, it was both ideological and a strategic move because it enabled him to accomplish certain things. Number one was he had made it very clear Orthodoxy was not going to compromise. It was not going to participate in any institution that was dominated by the reform movement. The Austritt policy, this secession type of policy, was championed by Rav Hirsch, and it was a radical move. And for those of you who grew up or lived in the United States, and you had the Jewish Federation in your community. So it's a mix. I was involved in the local Chicago Jewish Federation in many things. It's a mixture of Orthodox, conservative, reform, women, men, it's everything. Okay, he was dead set against something like that. No communal organization intermingling. He was able to, from his position now as the chief rabbi there of this rabbi and of this community, this standalone community, that showed Judaism could not coexist under the same roof with heretical ideologies, because a lot of reform is heretical, and it placed him in tension, not just with the reform movement, but as you can imagine, within the traditional Orthodox movement itself as well, because there were opinions that said the worst thing you could do is to separate from them, because it'll allow them to grow more and maybe pull people away. At least we're under the same roof. We can also have dialogue. We can talk. And so again, they say yesh v'yesh. I want to mention one topic, and then I'm going to give the floor over. The topic is what's known as Torah in Derech Eretz. You cannot talk about Rav Hirsch without that phrase. Torah in Derech Eretz is his lasting legacy, which also becomes known as Torah Mada. It's his educational vision. The integration, and we already talked a little bit about it, the integration of Torah, study, commitment to Torah, but with using also general and worldly knowledge. The harmonious mix of Torah, along with, in this case, Derech Eretz doesn't mean necessarily how you treat somebody. This is funny. This is exactly what we're talking about in Pirkei Avot this week. That everything in Hashem's world falls somehow under the sovereignty of halacha, of Torah, something Torah related. And this becomes his hallmark of this assimilation, in the idea of assimilating two things together, not assimilation to a non-religious world. And he is the founder. Remember, the idea began, the foundation with Rav Bernay, and moves now into Rav Hirsch, and this is where it expands up till this modern time. I have a little bit more to talk about with him. However, what I would like to do is ask Abby Leichman to introduce her mother. If I'm not mistaken, Abby's a great granddaughter. Her mom obviously is a great granddaughter. So to hear a little bit from Mrs. Nancy Klein, a little bit about anything care to share. This, whatever you want. The floor is yours. A little introduction first, please. Just take off your from mute from both of you.
Yeah, I'll introduce my mother. Yes, I'm great. She's great from her mother. She can explain all that. I'll just tell you one amusing thing because I was brought up to feel rightfully very proud that we were direct descendants of Rav Hirsch, and but I went to public school, and I remember clearly one day in second grade. I decided for whatever reason to get up in my class and say, "Guess what? I'm the great granddaughter of Rav Shimshon or Paul Hirsch." And I get this bl blank
Blank stare.
stare from my teacher and from all the kids. And Miss Kane is like, "That's very nice, Abby." That's so anyway, but all of you can appreciate it better than Miss Kane did. Yeah, my mother, Nancy Klein, is with us, and she knows a lot more about her great grandfather than I do, and then she has a few things she can share with you. So I'm gonna take it
Wonderful.
away.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Abby. Yes, we were brought up knowing that we came from illustrious background. Actually, I share a birthday, June 20th, not the year, with Shimshon Hirsch. There are several things that impress me about him. One, of course, is how prolific an author he was. It's just amazing the amount that he wrote. And this was, not with a computer or even a typewriter. And how this all got written and then published is absolutely amazing. Also, he has so many descendants. Some years ago for the 100th yard site, we had a gathering in New York. I don't remember, but there were over 100 people. And there was simultaneously big gatherings in Yerushalayim and even in Frankfurt. So I meet cousins all over the place. And to me, the most amazing thing is how timely today his writings are. When I was active in the women's branch of the Orthodox Union, I did a lot of public speaking to sisterhoods. And very often I would go to the 2-volume Chorev, as Rabbi mentioned, and find a quote, and I would read the quote and wait a moment and say, was this written last week? No, it was written over 100 years ago. It was absolutely amazing. One of my favorite quotes is because about a sheitel. He says, "To hide one's own hair under an ornamental covering made from someone else's hair or even from one's own after being cut is a very old custom which is not to be forbidden." That's also an example of how wordy he was. He wrote in very high German. Thank goodness there were some wonderful people who translated it. My mother told me that she never got terribly far in learning Chumash because she was brought up speaking German, and she was learning from the Hirsch German. And she showed me a page. The subject of the sentence was at the top, and the verb was at the bottom. One sentence, a whole page.
I want to interrupt you for 1 second and mention
Yeah.
that the English version of his German commentary on Torah, I tried going through it sometimes. Like it's not a good, it's not well done. It's just because it was such a high German and they were trying to put it into words that the modern Jew would understand in English. Didn't do it justice, I'm sure.
Just amazing, yes. We say Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. He was actually born Shimshon ben Raphael. His father was Raphael, and I think when his father died, he took that on, and so that's how he is known today.
Good point. Thank you.
We have in our family, I have a great grandson named Shimshon Raphael.
Wow.
There are a lot of them around. Um, there are two stories about him that were circulated in our family. I think all the descendants know these stories. Um, One was his son Mendel, who was my grandfather, as a young man was very ill, and they despaired of his life. And the doctor came and said, there's nothing else I can do, but is there something that Mendel really, really wants? If you could grant his wish, he would probably recover. And Rav Hirsch said, yes, there's a young woman that he wants to marry that we did not want him to marry because her family is not firm enough. But if it will save his life, we'll approve the marriage. And he recovered and married his wife, who became, of course, super, super frum. And here we all are.
Wow.
Also, in addition to all his writings and administering to his congregation and community, he founded a girls' high school, which but flourished until Hitler closed it down. I found out a few years ago that Dr. Ruth Westheimer, who was famous as Dr. Ruth, went there before she had to leave Germany. And my grandmother was educated there, so she had a very good Jewish background, more than most girls did in those days. And of course, the final story that everybody in the family quotes, at some point he took a vacation to Switzerland. And when he came back, one of his members said, how could you take time off from learning, take time off from ministering to your congregation? Why did you go to Switzerland? And he said, because someday I will meet my maker and he will ask me, did you see my beautiful Alps? And I want to be able to answer yes. So I think all this shows that besides being an incredible scholar and communal leader, he was also a very devoted husband and father. Actually, he wrote an ethical will for his children and exhorted them after he was gone to take care of their mother.
Do
So
you
he
know,
was,
does that still exist? Does there
yes,
copies?
yeah, yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So he was an amazing man, and all of us descendants are very aware of what a wonderful heritage we have.
That's fantastic. Wow. That is great. Thank you so much for sharing all those stories with us and that background. Just it also helps that it's not just someone who lived in the 19th century, in the 1800s, but we see that great great granddaughter, great granddaughter. I know the great 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 grandchildren, the great 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 grandchildren. I know many of us know. So it just helps to put a face to the family, and really so appreciate your time. Thank you, and again I thank you for bearing with me we're going this week, we're the next week. So, but thank you so much. Really appreciate that. All right. Okay, I'll make a final comment and we'll close. Let me just move this back to here. Place a pin. Okay. I will finish off Bezrat Hashem next week with Rav Hirsch. A little bit more I want to mention about him. And then, like I said, I'm going to start going backwards a little bit, about 100 years, and bring it back up till this point of the historical background of things that were going on with all these personalities beyond them. What was happening in the average Jewish community? What were the issues of the day, so to speak? And we'll take it from there. So in the meantime, hope you found this interesting. A very personal evening, Baruch Hashem. Really, again, Mrs. Klein, thank you so much. To Abby, thank you. And
Our pleasure.
this is wonderful. Really, thank you. Have a great
Our
evening,
pleasure,
everybody.
and
Or
thank
great
you.
afternoon.
I learned some things I didn't know also.
Oh,
So thank
good.
you.
I'm
Thank
glad.
you.
Me too. All right. Be well, everybody.
Good
Thank you.
night.
Night.